I work in a technology company on the third floor of a 4 stories building. What's on the fourth floor, though? Nobody knows, and no one talks about it. They made that clear on my first day when I asked the question during the induction. Nobody goes there, the HR manager replied without holding my glance. It's closed. We shan't talk about the fourth floor. I didn't ask any more, but I did see the stairs leading up to the fourth every day I worked there. Dark stairs leading up into a void. A sign next to it clarified the rule further. The fourth floor is permanently closed. Access forbidden. One night, I was late closing a deal. The building was dark and quiet, my desk brightened by a tiny lamp and my desktop's blue light. I was about to leave. I closed the lamp when I heard them. Steps. Slow, steady steps coming from upstairs. From the fourth floor. I shrug it off as, imagination, or maybe janitors who still had access to keep the floor clean. I still dashed down the stairs. Before getting out, I felt drawn to turn my head and look at the display on the elevator. The number 4 glowed in the dark lobby. Some had used the elevator to get there. Janitor, after all, I thought, leaving in a rush, maybe? Only later on did I think about it. That hadn't been the first time I had heard the steps. When I entered the building the first time for the job interview, I had been waiting in front of the door on the third floor. I had had my first look at those eerie stairs, and I did hear steps then too. The same slow, steady steps. I didn't give it much importance then, given I was about to have my first job interview, the first after the accident. But ever since I had heard them again that night, I avoided leaving late from work, and after a while I forgot about the elevator and the steps. That's until a month ago I saw the woman in the elevator. This time I had come in earlier. The previous night had been rough. It was exactly 1 year since the accident. 1 year without Linda. Since I hadn't slept a minute, I thought I'd go in and get my mind busy with work, stop thinking of Linda, of the frightening phone call, the screams, and the ambulance. I entered the building at 6:30, 2 hours earlier than usual. I walked through the entrance and stopped in front of the elevator. The red light on the display showed -1. I assumed someone from management was also coming in early, since they are the only ones who have access to the parking at -1. The elevator bell rang, breaking the silence of the sleeping building. The doors slid open. A thin woman was standing inside, her head slightly tilted down, her long black hair covering most of her face. The elevator smelled of rotten meat. Neither me nor the woman moved. Suddenly, a voice echoed inside my head. A whisper, silent and yet loud, an echo of a woman speaking to me from somewhere far away. "Come," the voice whispered. Then the doors started closing. Before they did, though, the woman moved suddenly and jumped closer, with the doors closing on her face. I just had a glimpse of it. 2 white bulging eyes looking like they belonged to someone who got stabbed right in their stomach, frozen, swollen to the point they seemed to be ready to pop out, white as snow. Under her 2 bulging eyes, where one would expect a mouth, was but an empty dark hollow in the shape of a terrified gape. It happened in a second, maybe less. The sound of the doors closing startled me back to reality. I stood frozen in front of the closed doors before taking the stairs. I got to the third floor, short of breath, and turned over my shoulder to look at the elevator's display. Fourth floor. Whatever I had witnessed was now just one floor above me. I shivered, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. Then I realized that whoever or whatever I had seen, that face, gaping in terror, gave me a strange feeling of familiarity. I got into the office and walked right to the one colleague I knew I could talk to. Harold was probably the only person I still conceded a beer to after Linda's violent exit from my life. He had a lot going wrong in his life too, and somehow that made me feel better. Not the fact that he might have been in more pain than me, no. It's just I didn't get the pity that most colleagues and friends had reserved for me since Linda's death. Harold had suffered of several psychosis in the past. He had been an addict and had been pushed out of his hometown to seek a new life away from toxic relations, drugs, and probably violence. His parents had never accepted his downward spiral. They didn't hesitate to cut him loose, leaving him with just enough money to leave town. In his worst moment, his parents had turned away, refused any responsibility or guilt. Harold did start a new life. We met when I started in the company. He was there already for a couple of years. He looked clean and elegant on the surface, but he had a deep sadness to anyone willing to look, especially in the nights when the ghosts, that's how he described it, started hovering all over him, depriving him of sleep. I'm telling you, she went to the fourth. I snapped while we were talking in the kitchen. He looked around, concerned someone might have heard me. Nobody goes to the fourth, he replied in an unconvincing whisper. I know you're hiding something, man, I confronted him. He sighed before looking me into the eyes. Let's just go to Sherman's after work. You need a beer. He walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts, with the image of that woman and that odd sense of familiarity. I didn't work anymore that day. I was determined to talk with Harold about the woman, to find out what he knew about her and about the fourth floor. How's work, man? I asked him when we sat down at the table at Sherman's. Vanya is at her worst lately. You really should do something about her, man. I took a sip from my pint before continuing. Do what? He answered, visibly irritated. She's my manager. She's mean. That's how life goes. Mean people be mean. Oh, for God's sake, Harold, it's a job. If you don't want to fight her, then find another. Everyone needs developers these days. What's holding you there? He sighed, but didn't answer. I looked at his face, and I saw a sadness much deeper than the one I was accustomed to recognize on him. Hey, can we be honest? I asked him later. He nodded. You've seen her, haven't you? The woman in the elevator. He took a moment before answering, then raised his head and looked at me numbly. I don't know no woman. He took a sip of his beer before looking at me again, his eyes trembling. I've seen two people, and I'm pretty sure it was another of my cute hallucinations. He gestured in the air as if trying to get rid of the thought or of the ghosts hovering around him. I was taken aback by his answer. It was no hallucination. It was clear now that some creepy folks were hiding something on the fourth floor. I thought of the sign on the stairs. Nobody goes to the fourth floor. Access forbidden. Where did these two people go? I asked. Well, I saw the elevator stopped on the fourth, and you don't think that's odd? I don't know what you want me to tell you, he snapped. I hallucinated. Nobody goes on the 4th. We don't talk about the 4th. I was now sure there was more to it, so I grabbed his arm and squeezed it. Harold, I need to know what's on the 4th floor. My voice shook while I thought of the odd familiarity I had felt when I had seen the woman. I have no idea. I think something happened there or something, and I don't know. The owner closed it? Or is renovating it? I don't know. Nobody knows. He jerked his arm out of my grasp. Something happened? I asked. Did someone die? A former employee? That's the rumor around the office? I thought nobody talks about the 4th floor. Nobody does, but some people wonder sometimes, he nodded. Silence broke between us. Harold sighed. She wanted me to come with her. The woman, she told me, I added. He looked at me, his face now tired more than ever. Maybe you should have gone then. Find out for yourself what's on the 4th. A few minutes passed before he spoke again. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go, man. He stood up, his body right in the pub, but his head and soul somewhere else. He gave me a last glance and left. I thought I had pushed him too much and felt bad about it. He was clearly having a rough time. I thought I would apologize the day after and left as well. The day after, I was waiting in front of the elevator again. I had come in early to make up for the work I hadn't done the day before. The night had been rough again. I had dreamed of Linda, of the phone call, her voice, of the sirens and the screams. I checked the elevator's display and swallowed. -1 again. Ding! The doors opened with a frightening, rusty sound. I looked right at the woman standing in the elevator. My feet sunk into the floor as I felt as heavy as I had never felt before. And my ear ached. The sirens, the phone call, the screams, Linda's voice. Blood was dripping from the face of the woman when she raised her head. Linda? I asked, struggling to believe the words coming out of my mouth. But there was no doubt. I'm still sure the more I think about it. My dead wife, my once graceful Linda, was standing in front of me, blood dripping from her face. In the background, I could hear the sirens of the ambulance. She stared at me. I felt each and every bone in my body aching at once. My heart stopped for a second. I was about to take a step towards her. Then she smiled. It was a different smile. Nothing like the ones she had delighted me with during our 5 years together. It was a smile coming from another world, a world where other rules applied, a world I didn't belong to. She tilted her head to one side. I noticed only now how wide her eyes had become, swollen like they were ready to pop out. She didn't look graceful now, yet it was Linda standing in front of me. I've thought about it ever since, about how determined I was to step into the elevator and go up with her to the 4th. Come, Eric. I probably think I would have come, wouldn't the doors suddenly have closed, snapping me back to the reality of the dark lobby. The elevator left, and I stayed for a few minutes, still. Tears wet my face, like they had done every night in the previous week. Eventually, I went upstairs to my desk. I sat down, turned on the laptop, and as usual, checked my emails. I had a few new ones, but one stood out. Sent at 1 a.m. It was from Harold. Now, It's difficult to explain the events that followed, so I will just state the facts. You make out whatever you want from it. The email read, Eric, I've been thinking of it and I can't switch off these thoughts. I felt the urge to come to the office after our conversation, and I saw them again in the elevator. I know what I must do. They asked me to go. I didn't want to at first, but now I think I should. It might be what I've been looking for all this time, the end of the ghosts. I stared at the screen for a while before taking action. I rushed to Harold's department, hoping to see him sitting there. I asked his manager, Vanya, where he was. She looked at me like I had asked her to lend me money. Actually, he's not here. He didn't show up, so tell him not to bother to come back. I gave her a distracted nod before turning away. Where was Harold? What had he seen upstairs that led him to not show up in the office? He had never missed a day. Well, I sent him a message asking him to reach out as soon as possible. No reply. I skipped lunch. My stomach was churning, but I couldn't even bear the thought of eating. I stayed late, checking my phone every 2 minutes. The day felt incredibly long. Suddenly, it was 7 p.m. I decided to get back to my desk and get some work done. I hadn't done anything all day, and clearly Harold didn't want to talk. Then I heard a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I will dream about it together with Linda's screams. It will hover around me like Harold's ghosts. The sound of steps came from right upstairs, from the 4th floor. They started slow, then they accelerated. I followed the sound with my eyes on the ceiling. The steps ended with the sound of glass breaking and a loud thump down in the parking lot. I ran towards the window and looked down. That's where Harold was laying sprawled above a car, twitching in what were his last breaths. It's been a week now, and I keep thinking of what happened. I keep thinking of the consequence of events. I can't help but doing so. My wife in the elevator, Harold's emails, the terrifying steps, the strength and the determination of an irreversible decision, the crash through the window. Had he jumped? Had he been pushed over the window by whoever was living or hiding on the 4th floor? I don't know. All I know is that I resigned yesterday, and I refused to come to the office to even sign the papers. I gave up all my benefits, and I'm about to leave town. I don't want to be near that building anymore. I don't want to see the elevator anymore. I don't even want to see that version of Linda. Whatever the 4th floor hides, I don't want to know. We shan't talk about the 4th floor. Nobody goes to the 4th floor.